They took her eyes, but they couldn't take what her father left behind. Now, the most feared man in New York is about to discover that the woman he's been protecting for a decade was never the one who needed saving. This is the story of the blind cellist who brought an empire to its knees. Rain hammered against the slick Manhattan pavement like bullets from the sky, each drop a tiny explosion against the concrete. Elena Russo gripped her white carbon fiber cane with white-knuckled desperation, the familiar weight of her BAM Supreme polycarbonate cello case slung across her back, her only anchor in a city that had turned into a watery nightmare. To be blind in New York City was to navigate chaos by sound and touch alone. To do it during a flash flood wasn't just difficult, it was a death sentence waiting to happen. Her cane swept and practiced, rhythmic arcs left and right, but the rising floodwaters were quickly robbing her of the tactile feedback she desperately needed. The textured pavement indicators she'd memorized were disappearing beneath inches of murky water. Her designer flats were already soaked through, and the cold was seeping into her bones. Panic clawed at her throat like a wild animal. She needed shelter, and she needed it immediately. Then, through the deafening roar of the storm, she caught it, the distinct, muffled hush of heavy revolving doors, and the faint, elegant strains of a string quartet playing a haunting Vivaldi piece. A hotel lobby, guided by the subtle warmth radiating from the building and the unmistakable scent of expensive lilies and floor wax. Elena pushed through the heavy brass doors of the St. Regis. The immediate silence of the grand foyer washed over her like a wave, a stark and comforting contrast to the chaos outside. She paused, shaking the rain from her dark hair, her chest heaving as she tried to orient herself in the vast, echoing space. Water dripped from her coat onto the pristine marble floor, the sound impossibly loud in the reverent hush of the lobby. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that she had just walked straight into the epicenter of a war that had been brewing for a decade. Less than 50 feet away, Alessandro Moretti was descending the grand staircase. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who owned not just the building, but every soul inside it. Clad in a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that clung flawlessly to his powerful shoulders, Alessandro was the undisputed head of the Moretti Syndicate, the most feared criminal organization on the entire eastern seaboard. A heavy platinum Rolex Daytona peeked from beneath his French cuffs, a cold testament to his immense inherited wealth and the blood that had built it. He was flanked by 6 heavily armed men, led by his ruthless underboss, Vincenzo. They had just concluded a brutal negotiation in a private suite upstairs. A rogue faction from the Russo family had attempted to siphon millions from the Moretti's offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Alessandro had dealt with the traitor personally, leaving a broken, bleeding man sprawled across the Persian rug of the penthouse, his screams still echoing in Alessandro's ears. Alessandro's adrenaline was still running high, his dark, calculating eyes scanning the lobby for threats with the instinct of a man who trusted no one and forgave nothing. He was a predator in a world of prey. "Bring the armored convoy to the front," Alessandro ordered Vincenzo, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute obedience. It was the voice of a man who had never been refused anything in his life. "And have the Russo warehouses in Brooklyn burned to the ground before midnight. Leave no witnesses. I want Marco Russo to wake up tomorrow with nothing but ash and regret." "Consider it done, boss," Vincenzo replied, reaching for his earpiece. Alessandro took another step toward the exit, his mind already shifting to the complex logistics of a full-scale mafia war. And then it happened. Elena, disoriented by the sudden shift in acoustics and the lingering panic from the storm, took a hurried step forward in search of the concierge desk. Her wet heel caught the edge of a slick marble tile. She lost her balance completely, the heavy cello case throwing her violently off-center. She pitched forward, her hands flying out instinctively to brace for the painful impact with the unforgiving floor. Instead, she slammed into a wall of solid, unyielding muscle. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs in a sharp gasp. Her white cane clattered loudly against the pristine marble, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot through the cavernous lobby. In a fraction of a second, the atmosphere in the St. Regis shifted from luxurious tranquility to lethal tension. Click, clack. The unmistakable, terrifying sound of 6 Glock 19s being drawn and racked filled the air. Vincenzo and the bodyguards instantly formed a tactical semicircle around their don, their weapons trained directly on the soaking wet girl who had dared to breach Alessandro Moretti's personal space. It was a cardinal sin in their world, one that usually ended in a body bag. "Step back," Vincenzo barked, his finger tightening on the trigger. The safety was off. This girl was seconds away from becoming a stain on the marble. Elena froze, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs like a trapped bird. She couldn't see the guns, but she could smell the sudden metallic tang of gun oil and the sharp, aggressive scent of expensive aftershave. She could hear the rustle of tailored suits and the heavy, synchronized breathing of men ready to kill without hesitation. Terror paralyzed her. She was trapped against the chest of a man who felt like a statue carved from granite, radiating heat and power and something far more dangerous, control. Alessandro had reacted entirely on instinct. When the figure tumbled toward him, his combat reflexes had flared, his hand reaching for his own weapon. But then he looked down. Time seemed to fracture and grind to an absolute halt. He saw the long dark hair plastered to her pale cheeks, water still dripping from the ends. He saw the panicked, sightless hazel eyes staring blankly at his collarbone, utterly lost and terrified. And then his gaze locked onto something that made his blood run cold. The delicate crescent-shaped scar resting just beneath her right jawline. A scar he had paid the world's best plastic surgeons to minimize 10 years ago. A scar that was supposed to be invisible. Alessandro's breath hitched in his throat. The cold, calculating Mafia Don, a man who had just ordered the deaths of dozens of men without blinking, suddenly looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His grip on her shoulder softened, shifting from defensive aggression to a desperate, possessive hold. "Boss?" Vincenzo asked, confusion lacing his aggressive tone. "Give the word." Alessandro didn't look at his men. He didn't look at the terrified patrons cowering behind the lobby pillars or the staff frozen at their posts. His eyes were entirely consumed by the trembling girl in his arms. The girl he had spent a decade watching from the shadows. The girl he had promised, sworn on his father's grave, to protect at all costs. He leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear, and whispered a single terrifying word that sent a shockwave through the room. Mine. The word wasn't a claim of property. It was something far more dangerous. A desperate vow laced with a decade of hidden buried obsession, and a love that defied all logic. The absolute silence that followed Alessandro's whisper was deafening. Elena trembled violently, her heightened senses rapidly processing the overwhelming stimuli. The man holding her smelled of rich Tom Ford oud wood, rain, and something else. The faint metallic scent of fresh blood, her fingers still pressed against his chest, could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the tailored fabric. It was the only thing grounding her. "Put the guns away," Alessandro commanded. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried a lethal authority that brooked zero hesitation. It was the voice of a man who was used to being obeyed instantly. "Alessandro, we don't know who," Vincenzo started, his fingers still hovering over the trigger. "I said put them away," Alessandro snarled, shooting his underboss a glare so venomous it made the seasoned killer take a physical step back. The sound of weapons being holstered rippled through the lobby like a wave. Elena finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I couldn't see. I slipped. Please just let me get my cane." She tried to pull away, but Alessandro's hands remained firmly, yet gently planted on her arms. His touch was possessive but careful, as though he was holding something infinitely precious. "You're not going back out there," Alessandro said softly, his tone completely shifting from the monster he had been seconds prior. He reached down effortlessly, retrieving her fallen white cane and pressing it gently into her trembling hand. "Vincenzo, take her cello, carefully. It's a late 18th century Testor. If you scratch it, I will take your hand." Elena gasped. How could a complete stranger possibly know the exact make and era of her prized instrument? No one knew that but her. She'd never told anyone. Before she could protest, Alessandro draped his heavy, dry cashmere overcoat around her shivering shoulders. The fabric still held his warmth, and despite everything, she found herself instinctively leaning into it. "Walk with me, Elena." Hearing her own name fall from this dangerous stranger's lips sent a jolt of pure ice down her spine. Her heart stopped. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "How do you know my name?" She tried to dig her heels into the marble, but his forward momentum was unstoppable. He was guiding her through the revolving doors, surrounded by a shield of heavily armed men. "I am someone who owes you a debt," Alessandro replied, cryptically as they stepped out into the storm. "A debt that can never truly be repaid." A massive black Mercedes Maybach S65 armored limousine was idling at the curb, its rear door already held open by a stoic driver who had clearly been waiting. "I'm not getting in a car with you," Elena shouted, panic finally overriding her shock. She swung her cane defensively, but Alessandro simply caught it midair with lightning speed. "Elena, listen to me," Alessandro said, his voice dropping to a desperate, intense register. "Marco Russo's men are currently kicking down the door of your apartment on West 74th Street. If you go home tonight, you will die. They will torture you for information you don't even know you have. Get in the car." The sheer conviction in his voice, coupled with the terrifying mention of an invasion at her home, shattered her resistance. Numb with shock, she allowed him to guide her into the plush, heated leather interior of the Maybach. Vincenzo carefully placed the cello case in the trunk before climbing into the front passenger seat. As the heavy armored doors sealed shut, cutting off the noise of the storm entirely, the car merged seamlessly into the chaotic New York traffic. The ride was agonizingly slow. Elena sat rigidly against the door, clutching her cane like a weapon, while Alessandro sat opposite her. His intense gaze was entirely fixed on her face, studying every line, every shadow. He poured a glass of Macallan 25 from the car's crystal decanter and placed it gently into her hand. "Drink. It will stop the shivering," he ordered softly. She took a small, burning sip, the liquid fire grounding her. "Why is someone trying to kill me?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I'm a cellist. I play at weddings and symphonies. I don't have enemies. I'm nobody." "You're not nobody," Alessandro corrected, pouring himself a drink. "You never were. And you're not a nobody because your father wasn't nobody." Elena's head snapped toward the sound of his voice. "My father, David Russo, was a corporate actuary. He died in a car crash 10 years ago. He was boring. He wore beige sweaters and did crossword puzzles." "You're lying." Alessandro let out a heavy, cynical sigh, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Your father, David, was a brilliant man, Elena. But he wasn't an actuary. He was the chief financial fixer for the Moretti crime syndicate. My syndicate." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "You're lying. My father was a good, boring man. He worked in a cubicle in New Jersey." "He worked in a secure vault, deep beneath the Diamond District," Alessandro countered, his tone devoid of malice, only heavy with grim truth. "He laundered hundreds of millions of dollars for my father. He was a ghost in the financial system. The best we ever had. A genius with numbers. A phantom in the ledgers. But 10 years ago, the Russo family found out who he really was. They wanted him to turn over the encrypted ledgers." Alessandro leaned forward, the scent of his cologne enveloping her. "That car crash on Interstate 95? It wasn't a drunk driver, Elena. It was a Russo hitman named Victor Moretti. Your father swerved his sedan to take the brunt of the impact, so you would survive in the passenger seat. The shattered glass took your sight, but his sacrifice saved your life." Tears pricked Elena's unseeing eyes as the buried trauma of that horrific night violently resurfaced. The screeching tires, the shattered glass, her father's final choked gasp, holding her hand in the wreckage. The smell of gasoline and blood, the sound of sirens growing closer. "Why are you telling me this now?" she sobbed, the whiskey glass shaking violently in her grip. "Why ruin my memory of him? Why destroy everything I thought I knew?" "Because Marco Russo just found out that David Russo's daughter is still alive," Alessandro said, his voice tightening with suppressed rage. "He thinks your father left the encrypted ledger with you. They were at your apartment tonight to torture it out of you. They would have killed you slowly, Elena. Very, very slowly." The Maybach smoothly pulled into a private subterranean parking garage, the heavy steel gates slamming shut behind them with a definitive, echoing clang. "For 10 years I have watched from the shadows," Alessandro confessed, the vulnerability in his voice a jarring contrast to his intimidating presence. "I've been your invisible guardian." Elena's mind raced as pieces of her life suddenly snapped together with terrifying clarity. "The anonymous scholarship to Juilliard," she whispered. "Funded through a shell corporation in Geneva," Alessandro confirmed. "The experimental corneal surgeries at Johns Hopkins? Paid for in cash," he replied. $100,000, no questions asked." Alessandro reached across the console, his large, warm hand gently enveloping her trembling fingers. He didn't force the contact, allowing her to pull away if she chose to. But she was too stunned to move, her brain still processing the avalanche of information. "When my father passed, I took over the syndicate," Alessandro said, his thumb lightly tracing the knuckles of her hand. "I swore on his grave that the debt we owed David Russo would be paid. I promised to keep you safe. You were never supposed to know about me, Elena. You were supposed to live a beautiful, ordinary life in the light, far away from my darkness." The car door opened, and the cold air of the underground garage rushed in. "But tonight, the darkness found you," Alessandro said, stepping out and offering his hand to guide her. "Welcome to 432 Park Avenue. You are standing in the most secure fortress in Manhattan. You will stay here until every last member of the Russo family is eradicated from this earth. That is my promise to you." Elena gripped his hand, stepping out of the car. She had stumbled into the St. Regis, seeking temporary shelter from a summer storm. Instead, she had walked directly into a golden cage, held captive by a Mafia don who had secretly orchestrated her entire existence for a decade. The penthouse at 432 Park Avenue was a sensory fortress suspended a quarter of a mile above the chaotic streets of Manhattan. For 3 days, Elena existed within a world of absolute suffocating luxury. Her bare feet learned the topography of heated Afghan silk rugs and cool imported Carrara marble. The air was perpetually climate-controlled, carrying the subtle, synthesized fragrance of white tea and fig, a scent designed to soothe, but which only reminded her she was trapped. Yet despite the opulent comfort, it was a high-altitude prison. Alessandro Moretti treated her with a terrifying, reverent obsession. He rarely slept. Elena could hear the heavy, measured pacing of his handmade Berluti Oxfords on the hardwood floors late into the night, his mind clearly racing with plans and strategies. He fed her elaborate meals prepared by a private Michelin-starred chef, provided her with racks of silk loungewear, and spent hours simply sitting in the corner of the grand living room, listening to her play her testor cello. He never explained himself. He never apologized. He simply watched. But beneath the surface of this gilded cage, a mafia war was boiling over. The Russo family, desperate and cornered, was tearing the city apart looking for her. Sirens wailed endlessly from the streets below, a distant symphony of the chaos Alessandro was orchestrating to crush his enemies. On the fourth evening, the atmosphere in the penthouse shattered. Vincenzo burst through the double mahogany doors, his heavy breathing audible even over the sonata Elena was playing. The doors slammed against the walls. "Boss," Vincenzo's voice was tight, urgent. "Marco Russo just made a move on the Teterboro airstrip. They intercepted a shipment of our heavy artillery. It's a bloodbath. They have our men pinned down in Hangar 4. We're losing men by the minute." Alessandro cursed loudly, the sound of a heavy glass tumbler slamming onto a table, echoing through the room. Marco is getting desperate. He knows we are closing the net. He's making stupid moves, and stupid moves get people killed. I need to be there to coordinate the extraction myself. "It's risky, Alessandro," Vincenzo warned. "It could be a distraction. It could be a trap." "I don't have a choice," Alessandro snarled. "If I lose that shipment, the commission will view it as weakness. The other families will start circling like sharks. I can't show weakness. Not now, not ever." Elena heard the metallic scrape of him loading a magazine into his customized 6-hour P226. The sound made her blood run cold. He crossed the room, stopping inches from where she sat with her cello. "Elena," he said, his voice instantly softening, dropping an octave into that possessive tone that made her skin prickle. "I have to leave for a few hours. The building is on total lockdown. The elevators require biometric clearance. No one gets in or out without my personal approval." "Are you going to be safe?" she asked, her voice trembling perfectly, projecting the image of the terrified civilian he believed her to be. Her fingers tightened on the neck of her cello. "I am always safe, Mialucci," he murmured, his knuckles gently brushing her cheek. "I will leave Daniel here to oversee your personal detail. He is my top captain. You have nothing to fear. I will be back before you know it." With a sudden rush of cold air and the heavy thud of the reinforced doors, Alessandro and Vincenzo were gone. The vast penthouse fell into an eerie, suffocating silence. Elena sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the strings of her cello. She focused her hearing, mapping the room with military precision. She heard the faint hum of the sub-zero refrigerator in the kitchen, the whistling of the wind against the floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass, and the deliberate, heavy breathing of the man Alessandro had left behind, Daniel. He was standing near the entryway. He smelled heavily of cheap tobacco, peppermint gum, and a distinct underlying odor of nervous sweat. It was the sweat of a man whose adrenaline was spiking, a man with something to hide. "So," Daniel's voice finally broke the silence. It lacked the respectful deference he usually displayed around Alessandro. There was a cruel, sharp edge to it now. The famous Elena Russo, the blind princess sitting on a ghost fortune. Elena didn't move. "Alessandro said you were here to protect me." Daniel let out a low, humorless chuckle. She heard the distinct, terrifying sound of a silencer being screwed onto the barrel of a pistol. The sound was soft, almost gentle, but it made her blood freeze. "Alessandro is a fool," Daniel sneered, his footsteps moving slowly across the Persian rug, toward her. "He let his obsession with you blind him to the reality of the business. You don't burn down half of New York over a girl. It's bad for business." Elena's breathing grew shallow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Marco Russo offered me $3 million in a territory in Queens to open the door from the inside," Daniel said casually, as if discussing the weather. "The Teterboro attack? Just bait to get the boss out of the penthouse. He's probably dead by now, or will be soon. Either way, it doesn't matter. You're betraying him," Elena whispered. "I'm securing my retirement," Daniel corrected. He was close now. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Marco doesn't want you dead, sweetheart. Not yet. He wants the ledger your father hid, the master account numbers for the Swiss and Cayman shell corporations. David Russo was a paranoid man. He wouldn't just destroy it. He left it with you." "I don't know what you're talking about," Elena whimpered, shrinking back against the neck of her cello. "I'm just a musician. I've been blind since I was 12. I don't know anything about ledgers or accounts." "Cut the crap," Daniel spat, reaching out and brutally grabbing a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. Elena cried out in pain. "You're going to tell me exactly how to access those accounts, or I'm going to start breaking those delicate, expensive fingers of yours, one by one, and then maybe I'll move on to your pretty face." Daniel made his first fatal mistake. He assumed her blindness equaled helplessness. He assumed the trembling girl in front of him was nothing more than a fragile victim. He didn't know that David Russo, a man hunted by the most dangerous criminals on the East Coast, had spent his final years preparing his daughter for the exact moment the shadows finally caught up with her. "Please," Elena sobbed, dropping her cello bow. Her hand scrambled blindly across the floor, desperately reaching for her white carbon fiber cane lying near the chair. "I'll tell you whatever you want. Just please don't hurt me." "That's a good girl," Daniel mocked, loosening his grip on her hair slightly, his guard dropping as his arrogance peaked. "Where is it? Where did your father hide the ledger?" Elena's fingers wrapped tightly around the rubber grip of her cane. The trembling stopped. The tears vanished. "The ledger isn't a book," Elena whispered, her voice suddenly devoid of all panic. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. Daniel frowned, leaning in closer. "What did you say?" "I said," Elena's voice turned to ice, "it's not a book. You pathetic amateur." In a blur of motion so fast, Daniel couldn't even process it. Elena didn't just stand up, she exploded upward. Using her grip on his forearm as leverage, she twisted her body violently. Her left hand snapped up, driving the heel of her palm directly into the nerve cluster under Daniel's jaw with bone-rattling force. Daniel choked, his vision flashing white as his grip on her hair completely released. Before he could raise his suppressed pistol, Elena's right hand whipped the carbon fiber cane through the air. Her thumb depressed a concealed biometric button on the grip. With a sharp metallic snick, an 8-inch razor-sharp titanium blade shot out from the tip of the cane. She slashed upward with lethal precision. The blade severed the flexor tendons in Daniel's right wrist. A gurgling scream tore from Daniel's throat as the pistol clattered uselessly to the marble floor. He stumbled back, clutching his heavily bleeding arm in absolute shock. "You," he stammered, unable to comprehend that the fragile blind girl had just surgically dismantled him in 3 seconds. Elena didn't hesitate. Her spatial awareness, honed by a decade of relying entirely on acoustics and air pressure, was flawless. She stepped forward, sweeping his legs out from under him with a brutal kick to his knee. Daniel crashed onto his back, gasping in agony. Elena calmly stepped over him, pressing the tip of her titanium blade directly against his carotid artery. "My father didn't hide the ledger, Daniel," Elena said, her tone as cold and commanding as any Mafia don's. "He encoded it. It's hidden in the sheet music of an original concerto he composed for me. I memorized every account number, every routing code, every shell corporation when I was 15 years old. I hold the financial reins of the Moretti and Russo empires in my head." Daniel stared up at her blank, unseeing eyes, absolute terror finally setting in. She wasn't a victim. "I've known Alessandro was watching me for 10 years, Elena continued, pressing the blade just enough to draw a bead of blood. "I allowed his men to shadow me. I allowed myself to be brought here because I knew Marco Russo would eventually try to finish what he started. And I needed Alessandro's resources to wipe the Russos off the map completely. My father's ledger? It's been inside my head the whole time." Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors to the penthouse burst open with the force of an explosion. Alessandro Moretti stormed in, his suit jacket discarded, his dress shirt stained with blood, his P226 raised and ready to fire. Vincenzo and 3 guards flooded in behind him, weapons drawn, having realized the Teterboro attack was a diversion, and racing back through the city like madmen. Alessandro froze, the breath completely leaving his lungs. The scene before him defied all logic. His fragile, terrified Elena was standing over his top captain, a blooded titanium blade pressed to the traitor's throat. Her posture was flawless, radiating a lethal cold authority that commanded the room. "Elena?" Alessandro whispered, lowering his weapon an inch. His mind struggled to process the dominant predator standing in his living room. Elena didn't turn her head. "He sold you out to Marco Russo, Alessandro, for $3 million and a slice of Queens. He came for the ledger." Vincenzo looked at the bleeding, terrified Daniel and then at the blind cellist, his jaw practically hitting the floor. "Boss," she completely neutralized him. Alessandro's shock slowly melted into something far more dangerous, a dark, magnificent smirk that spread across his face. The obsession he held for the innocent girl morphed instantly into a profound, terrifying awe for the queen standing before him. "Vincenzo," Alessandro ordered, his voice vibrating with lethal pride. "Take Daniel to the soundproof room in the basement. He gets to live until he tells us exactly where Marco Russo is sleeping tonight. Then he doesn't. Take your time with him." "Yes, boss," Vincenzo said, roughly hauling the weeping traitor off the floor and dragging him out of the room. The doors clicked shut, leaving Alessandro and Elena alone in the shattered luxury of the penthouse. Alessandro holstered his weapon and slowly walked toward her. Elena pressed a button on her cane, the blade retracting seamlessly back into the shaft. He stopped inches from her, the scent of gunpowder and rain radiating from his clothes. He reached out, his blood-stained hands gently framing her face. "You played me," Alessandro murmured, his thumb tracing the scar on her jawline. There was no anger in his voice, only deep, reverent fascination. "For a decade, I thought I was the guardian angel protecting a helpless girl in the dark. I thought I was your savior." "I was never helpless, Alessandro," Elena replied, leaning into his touch. A dangerous smile finally broke across her lips. You just preferred the illusion. My father was the smartest man in your syndicate. Did you really think he would leave me defenseless? He trained me, he prepared me, he turned me into a weapon. Alessandro leaned down, his lips brushing against hers in a fierce, possessive promise. Marco Russo dies tonight. Every warehouse, every safe house, every remaining soldier with his blood will burn before the sun comes up. I will leave nothing standing. I know, Elena whispered, her hand sliding up to grip the lapels of his ruined shirt. And when the ashes settle, Alessandro, we will rebuild this empire together. Unseen, unstoppable. Alessandro kissed her deeply, sealing a pact forged in blood, deception, and a love that had been 10 years in the making. New York City didn't know it yet, but the Mafia hierarchy had just violently shifted. The untouchable Don Moretti had finally met his match, and the most dangerous person in the criminal underworld was the one nobody saw coming. If you were captivated by Elena's hidden strength and Alessandro's dark obsession, don't forget to hit that like button right now. We love bringing you these intense stories filled with unexpected twists, betrayal, and absolute vengeance, because that's what Dad's Powerful Revenge is all about. Want to see what happens next in the underworld? Have an idea for a new thrilling saga? Drop a comment below and let us know. Your suggestions might just become our next episode. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss a dramatic episode. We drop new content every week that will keep you on the edge of your seat. This is Dad's Powerful Revenge, where the forgotten fight back, and justice always finds a way.